Abusia ensem baako mienu bi ekoso sa ensem ahodo ekoso yi efa yankasa ye President John Dramani Mahama ho na de tie nyina ne se enche bia ye nansan mu ya ana ye President John Dramani Mahama enya akwanya stonko ewo the UN General Assembly asia. In fact okodwiri ensem ahodo edigu ho no mo ne ensem okodwiri gu ho no mo dodo na always tension ewo Africa ha no African countries mu nipa dodo na eboje President John Dramani Mahama so say in fact wakasa yi pa na ne nsem ahodo a wokan ye no ewo ho no no nso no anye abrofo no mu bi de ne nsem ahodo a wokan wo ho no nipa dodo na adwen wo mo say ensem president ekokan ye ewo UN General Assembly na so no ensem a enye ono ankasa na etwere sa ensem na ECOWAS leaders no mu bi ana ekeka wo mo adwen ene omuti ebo mu a omotwere ensem we edema President John Dramani Mahama se onkoka ana se African leaders no mu bi ana eka wo mo adwen bo mu omotwere ensem ahodo a President John Dramani Mahama ekokan ewo UN General Assembly na asem ebusua ni padodo na accra adwen esan so koye wo mo se ebra na ogina podium no animu na okasa no the late Kwame Nkrumah ehonhom bi na ebehye President John Dramani Mahama mu a ema odi dwiri ensem ahodo we mu gina gu ho no mu a ehiki wiase afana nyina ebusua empenifo sika komo hoi ye no kokuo no enipa na nkasa ayiniti yankasa ye president ama oda hoi baby a onya ne nsem efriye okeka edisi ene okokaye ewo UN General Assembly na sem ebusia nipa no ono ane da hoi na yente yonke ya oda ho no moi enu mo asem ba ko mienu bia oka edefa President John Dramani Mahama ansa na ya bwewura President John Dramani Mahama video ye da hoi mo na yentie emfri ono ankasa na no baby a onya ensema hodo a okokaye ewo UN General Assembly na sem baby a onya free
President John Mahama of Ghana, in his previous speech at the UN General Conference, he said that Africa must exercise her sovereignty over her natural resources.
Okay.
And everybody should underline the word sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
Yeah, sovereignty.
Yeah.
So, we should all stand behind President John Mahama.
True.
And I think he will never be invited at the UN conference again.
He'll never be invited.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know even the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, is happy for him.
Sure.
Yes.
Your speech at the UN General Assembly was brilliant. The future of the world is Africa. Can you tell us more about that? Because a lot of Africans felt like Nkrumah is back again.
Well, when you speak from the heart, that's how it comes across. And so you need to put your thoughts into your speech and own the speech, and that is what I did. I crafted it. And I meant every word in there. I talked about reparations. I talked about the global system and how it is changing and how it has been unjust to Africans. And in any new global order that succeeds it, there must be justice and equity for Africa, including having an equal say, in international global institutions like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the multilateral financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and all that. Africa must have a greater say in all these institutions. Aside from that, the current world order is rigged against Africa. And so, if you look at the colonial patterns of trade that were established by our colonial masters, they are the same patterns of trade. Railways lead to only where there are resources, and they lead from there to the ports in order to extract those resources and export them to other destinations. We continue to live as colonial slaves. Let me call it new colonial slaves, because we have a flag and we have independence, but still the system is rigged such that we have to export materials raw to our former colonial masters. They use those resources, to produce manufactured and finished goods, and then determine the prices of those goods and export them back to us. But when we export the raw materials, we don't determine the price. We don't determine the price of cocoa. We don't determine the price of gold. Cocoa doesn't grow in Europe, and yet Europe determines how much cocoa should be purchase for. And so these are all the kinds of things
Yes, I mean, so
that we need to look at.
Does it mean that we are not fully independent, like what you're just saying?
Yeah, Nkrumah said it. After we gained independence, he said we're moving from the era of colonialism to the era of neo-colonialism. It would take time to reform the system. For instance, we've passed the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yeah.
But even though we can export duty-free, tariff-free into each other's markets, where are the railways to move those goods? Where are the ports to move those goods? Where are the roads to move those goods? If you have to move goods from Ghana to another African country, you probably must have to transship it through Europe or some other destination before it gets there. So until we're able to establish the infrastructure to be able to exchange people and goods between ourselves, we cannot fully utilize the potential that the African Continental Free Trade Area gives us. And that is part of the new colonialism that I talk about.
And so a brother president Kasa was also a Kasa edifa Israel and Gaza and Tokwano said he is echo. Now in fact and some who a president a crying and Israel for no be there. Ama Israel ambassador over Ghana has Kasa say and some who a president John Dramani Mahama and Koka efa Israel and Gaza and Tokwano a UN General Assembly Aseno a bet me across to genocide in Tino. President Mahama and Kasa Enfenchile ye Hamas for na omo emfa omo akondi emu fom na se omo de omo akondi egu fom a omo nso ebetwa bibia so na Israel ambassador yi ono ne da hoi ensema hodo otumu se eye President Mahama e kae e de fa eye Gaza ani Israel wa anya ne de a eno nti ama okasa se en ensema hodo a osan so e kasa e de fa ho no ebusuya yempomra video mu na yenti eye Israel ambassador to Ghana ne nsema hodo a ono nso e kasa e de fa eye President John Dramani Mahama a statement hodo a kan e de fa eye Israel and Gaza en tokwa no ho ebusuya yenti papa.
Ghana criticized Israel strongly. I don't think rightly, but they did, as for what happened during the war.
That's right.
I think some of the statements that were made here concerning genocide, for instance, were wrong statements, very wrong statements. But now we are facing a new chapter. And unless the international community, including Ghana, including ECOWAS, including the African Union, will call Hamas, put down your arms, give a chance to peace, enough with the violence, enough with the brutality, enough with acting like animals, and give peace a chance, nothing will happen. We can't do it only by ourselves, by military might. There is here a responsibility of the international community. Ghana has a responsibility as well as a very important state in Africa. It's a very important state in ECOWAS to sound a very clear voice and tell Hamas enough is enough. As long as those people are there, I think we are facing a huge challenge.
Ghana recognized the state of Palestine in 1988 and supported a two-state solution to the conflict since then. And I say, contrary to the claims of some, a two-state solution would not be a reward for Hamas. It would rather be a reprieve for the hundreds of thousands of innocent women and children and people who are facing collective punishment and forced starvation for no reason other than the fact that they are Palestinian. For nearly 2 years and for the fear of reprisals, we here in this General Assembly have been playing hide and seek with language to find the right words to help us avoid or excuse what we all know is taking place in Gaza. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter what you call it. If it looks like a duck, it swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, well, then it must be a duck. The crimes in Gaza must stop. The crimes in Gaza must stop. Madam President, I also want to draw particular attention to the conflict in Sudan, which this body has described as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. 12 million people have had to flee their homes. And when we speak of migration, we refer to the 12 million new Sudanese refugees, whom we as a global community should be willing to assist in much the same way that many member nations readily assisted new refugees coming out of Ukraine. Let's dispense with the euphemisms and dog whistles and speak frankly. It is not a mystery that when leaders of Western nations complain of their migration problems, they are often referring to immigrants from the global south. But many of those immigrants are climate refugees. And interestingly, the global north emits 75% more greenhouse gases than the global south. However, the effects of climate change are more severe in the global south because we lack the resources to address them effectively. And so when the desert encroaches on our villages and towns and they become unlivable, we are forced to flee. Warsan Shire, a Somali-born prophet, a Somali-British poet born in Kenya to Somalian refugee parents, was London's first youth poet laureate. She writes in her poem titled Home. And it says, you have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one bends their palms under trains beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled mean something more than just a journey. Madam President, we cannot normalize cruelty. We cannot normalize hatred. We cannot normalize xenophobia and racism. If we're going to tell a story, let's not tell it slant. Let's tell all the truth. When we speak of migrants, we speak of Mami Ewusi Mensah Frimpong, a judge on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. She's the first black female judge on any of California's 4 federal district courts. She was born here in America to immigrant parents from Ghana. We speak of Peter Bosman, a medical doctor in Ghana who moved to the town of Piran in Slovenia in the 1980s and later became the first black mayor of Piran, the first black mayor in Slovenia and in the whole of Eastern Europe. We speak of T. Michael, the iconic Ghanaian Norwegian artist and designer. And of course, we speak of the late Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General. Former United Nations Secretary General and Nobel Peace Prize recipient, who was born in Ghana but spent his adulthood in various places in America and Europe. These are people who have brought great distinction to the countries that they decided to call home. In this era of global uncertainty, Africa must exercise sovereignty over its natural resources to raise the necessary funds to ensure the well-being of its citizens. The days of parceling out vast concession areas to foreign interests for exploitation must come to an end. We'll continue to welcome foreign investment, but we must negotiate better for a bigger share of the natural resources that belong to us. And we must insist on value addition to these resources. We're tired of the continued image of poverty-stricken, disease-ridden rural communities living at the periphery of huge foreign-controlled natural resource concession areas. We're tired of having people extract the most they can from us and in return offer us the very least by way of respect, consideration, and dignity. We're tired of not being represented in ways that reveal the richness and complexity of our history or acknowledge all that we have overcome to arrive here in this liminal space of untold possibilities. Allow me to echo the Indian-American writer Arundhati Roy, who wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her briefing." I want to add that for the sake of Africa, and quite selfishly for the sake of my 18-year-old daughter, I hope that this new world that is arriving is a place of safety and equality for women and girls. To succeed, we must empower everyone, including women and girls, to reach their full potential. In closing, Madam President, I'd like to congratulate you on your election to preside over this historic 80th General Assembly and on being the 5th woman to hold this distinction. I'd also like to congratulate Her Excellency Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman on being the first woman Vice President of Ghana. Now every Ghanaian girl knows the heights to which she can ascend. Words matter, but issues of representation matter even more, which is why Ghana looks forward to the appointment of a woman as Secretary General of this organization in the near future.